results of this in terms of the quality of his life are extraordinary buoyancy, vigor, straightforwardness, simplicity, humility, security, joyousness, uncanny perspicacity, and unfathomable compassion. Without anything said or done, just the impact of meeting a personality so developed can be enough to change another's whole way of life. But in the end, it is not the extraordinariness of the teacher that perplexes, intrigues, and deepens the students. It is the teacher's utter ordinariness." End quote. It should be noted that this was written as the introduction to the words and teaching of Mr. Baker's teacher, Suzuki Roshi. The introduction was meant to describe a real person, and by extension, as is clearly stated, all people with the title Roshi. It is not an idealized reference to a heavenly being or some distant mythological religious figure. It was also written 2 years prior to Suzuki Roshi passing the mantle of authority to Mr. Baker, anointing him as Baker Roshi, as was well known by Baker at the time of the above writing. Essentially, he was describing himself for his future students. To summarize, in the definitions and descriptions of the Zen master quoted above, there is an extraordinary claim to authority. These descriptions were given by individuals who themselves are masters, the very spokesperson for Zen institutions believed by believing Westerners to be the only valid voices of Zen. These definitions were given by modern representatives of Zen from Korea, China, Taiwan, Japan, and the United States. It's across the board, essentially. One can easily see from this description of a Zen master that it is not necessary for any particular Zen master to make claims concerning his or her own enlightenment or his or her own level of perfection, because Zen institutional traditions repeat this claim for the person sitting in the role of Zen master. Any particular Zen follower who is adequately socialized into a given group cannot but see the master as expressing the mind of the Buddha. Indeed, the master often believes it himself. Through its structures, mythology, its ritual practices, and perhaps most significantly through use of a special set of terms and definitions, the Zen institution reinforces this claim for the Zen master. So what is the basis for Zen's claims about such authority? The Chan Zen sect does not base its authority on a text, as do other sects of Buddhism, but rather through the idea of mind-to-mind transmission. This transmission is ritualized as Dharma transmission, by which the enlightened mind of the Buddha itself has been passed down through the ages, similar to one candle lighting the next candle. In a supposed unbroken chain, the enlightened mind of the Buddha is transmitted from one enlightened Zen master to the next. Zen claims this transmission is a separate transmission outside the teachings, that is, outside of texts. In doing so, it marks itself as essentially different from and more authoritative than all other Buddhist schools. In this scheme, the living Zen master standing in front of you is the last in this unbroken series of enlightened beings. Hence, holding the title Chan Master or Zen Master becomes an unquestioned marker of authority. Everyone else is open to delusional thoughts, self-interest, self-aggrandizement, and all the shortcomings of ordinary human beings. To summarize, the basis of Zen's authority is composed of 3 elements. 1, the Zen Master, who is considered an enlightened being beyond the understanding of ordinary people, a living person who sits in for the Buddha. 2, Dharma transmission, according to convention, is the formal recognition on the part of a master that his disciple has attained an understanding equal to that of the teacher. And 3, unbroken lineage, supposedly starting with 7 prehistoric Buddhas and continuing through the historical Shakyamuni Buddha in India to the 6 Chan patriarchs in China, down to the present-day living masters. It will help in understanding Zen social functioning to keep in mind Pierre Bourdieu's basic model of religious authority. Bourdieu argues that the standard setup for religious authority requires 3 mutually reliant zones. 1, a deep origin of truth or perfection in the form of a past sage, saint, deity, or being. 2, a means for bringing that truth perfection forward in time. And 3, the contemporary spokesperson for that primordial truth perfection, who is sanctioned to represent it in the present and distribute it to the believing public, which delegates to him just this power and legitimacy. Bordeaux sees religious authorities always involved in a toing and froing, shuttling back and forth between the deep origins and its application in the present. Put otherwise, in any moment of religious authority, there is always an audience focused on the singular priest figure, who is expected to funnel the totality of truth and being from the past into the group. In Zen, the historical Buddha is the deep origin of truth. Dharma transmission and the idea of an unbroken lineage are the means of bringing that truth perfection forward in time, while the Dharma transmitted Zen master is the contemporary spokesperson for the primordial truth perfection. In light of Bordeaux's ideas, it is not surprising that around Zen centers the focus is on who does and does not have Dharma transmission, rather than what it actually means or what these people actually are or do. This creates a hierarchical power relationship. So-called Zen insight or wisdom can function as the basis of the relationship between the student and Zen master. Essentially, every aspect of the student's life is open to the teacher's judgment. The struggle occurs over at least 2 issues. The student wanting to be recognized for having realized the truth of Zen, and over the student being authorized to be a teacher in his or her own right, along with the perks and privileges of that position. Both these issues depend solely on the teacher's unquestionable decision. Because of Zen's emphasis on no self, we can argue that Zen places more importance than other religions on the cleric's, in this case the Zen master, lack of self-interest and supposed unconcern with his public image. This does not mean there is, in fact, a lack of self-interest, and only that the master's self-interest can more easily be disguised beneath the Zen ideals of enlightened mind, selflessness, and teaching. In contrast, common people, or ordinary people, cannot be trusted because by nature their actions are driven by self-interest. The imputed lack of self-interest of the master implies that everything he does is to help the student, whether the student understands this or not. These imputed qualities of the master, 1, a lack of self-interest, and 2, everything the master does is to help the student, easily combine to become tools of dominance and abuse in interpersonal relationships between the master and his disciples. And in fact, there is widespread abuse. Sasaki Roshi and Rinzai-ji. Perhaps the best example of cult-like behavior in modern Western Zen group is the Rinzai-ji, the organization formed around Joshu Sasaki Roshi, a Japanese Roshi that lived in America. Sasaki arrived in America in 1962, and by 1974 had a well-established reputation in Western Zen, and accumulated 3 major properties. Into 2012, he stood out as an authentic, demanding, real deal Zen master with many fully ordained disciples and close to 30 affiliated groups across the United States and Europe. But all this was to take a dramatic turn on 16 November 2012 when Eshu Martin, a former monk of Sasaki, posted an open letter on the internet that immediately went viral, titled, "Everybody Knows." The letter spoke openly on what until then was a tightly kept secret regarding Sasaki Roshi, but also disclosing the organization's complicit role in these processes. Quote, this is the beginning of that letter. Joshu Sasaki Roshi, the founder and abbot of Rinzai-ji, is now 105 years old, and he has engaged in many forms of inappropriate sexual relationships with those who have come to him as students since his arrival here more than 50 years ago. His career of misconduct has run the gamut from frequent and repeated non-consulted consensual groping of female students during interview, to sexually coercive after-hours team meetings, to affairs and sexual interference in the marriages and relationships of his students. Many individuals that have confronted Sasaki and Rinzai-ji about this behavior have been alienated and eventually excommunicated, or have resigned in frustration when nothing changed, or worst of all, have simply fallen silent and capitulated. For decades, Joshu Roshi's behavior has been ignored, hushed up, downplayed, justified, and defended by the board of directors, monks, nuns, and students that remained loyal to him. Certainly as an organization, Rinzai-ji never accepted the responsibility of putting a stop to this abuse, and has never taken any kind of remedial action. That's the end of the letter. The publication of this letter initiated a torrent of further disclosures. Stories accumulated, often with great detail, while ex-insiders with close knowledge of the organization now felt free to talk openly. It also turned out that Sasaki was the center of a sexual and financial scandal involving embezzling temple funds for pleasure spending sprees in Japan in the early 1950s, and had spent 8 months in prison because of these matters. Of course, they never told the Americans when they sent them.
You're at 18 minutes.
Yeah. With these disclosures, a number of women in America on the receiving end of Sasaki's transgressions reported how they felt vindicated for leaving, how they felt abused and used, how they never realized they were one of perhaps hundreds. It was later estimated by an independent counsel looking into the matter that between 100 and 300 women were abused by Sasaki. Sasaki's own response to these concerns, presented to him by his students, amounting to him threatening to stop teaching and leave should he be forced to change his behavior. Sasaki clearly viewed his own position as Zen master as beyond criticism, being the very top of an absolute hierarchy. His position was based not only on the fact that he was an authorized Zen master, but also that he was the oldest living Zen Roshi from Japan, who had brought authentic Zen practice to the United States from the famous Myoshinji lineage monastery. This made him an authorized spokesman for the entire Rinzai tradition and imputed to him to be a person of guaranteed belief and trust. It was like the FDA signed stamp prime meat. Also, Sasaki's senior monks and nuns and loyalists left no room to question his behavior. When women complained to monks or other students who were older in the practice and higher in the hierarchy, they rarely met with sympathy. As the senior student declared, "If you don't like it, leave." End quote. One woman confronted Sasaki in the 1980s and reported that she found herself an outcast afterwards. She said that afterwards hardly anyone in the group that she entered with would talk to them. That's her and her husband. Sasaki's belief in students' acceptance of his unquestioned authority and legitimacy was inculcated through a long and slow process of their own acceptance into the group and their gaining a place in Sasaki's hierarchy. Sasaki's Oshos, that is his ordained, were a group close to him, more committed than ordinary students. They held positions of importance and were dressed in robes and interpreted and explained Sasaki's teaching. In the process, they made it clear if someone had a problem with Sasaki's behavior, it was a sign of their lack of understanding of Zen. This view was common at other Zen centers related to their own master. They remained silent to protect their years of practice, along with their elevated positions in the hierarchy. Their attitude is closely connected to the severity of Sasaki's retreats and practice periods, functioning as a rite of initiation. Everyone understood that Sasaki could, at his discretion, strip them of their positions and force them to leave. The claim that the claim that whatever Sasaki did was in fact Zen teaching even amounted to declaring that what for the women constituted sexual abuse was really a teaching method. When a young woman who was Sasaki's assistant at the time complained about Sasaki's constant sexual advances, one monk replied, quote, that sexualizing is teaching for particular women. The monk's theory, widespread in Sasaki's circle, was that such physicality can check a woman's overly strong ego. Apparently men didn't have overly strong egos. Sasaki claimed his sexual advances were in fact teaching non-attachment and emptiness, core Zen values. Sasaki and his loyalists thus in effect claimed that these acts, which seemed self-serving and abusive to the unenlightened, were really examples of Mahayana Buddhist upaya, which means skillful means, that teach the Dharma in a way that the students need, whether they recognize it or not. It is important to realize that the women who remained silent for such a long time became accomplices in their own abuse. They had bought into Zen's ideology and perfected Zen master. This is not surprising, as the ideology is repeated constantly in Zen literature, talks, and rituals, which juxtapose the enlightened Zen master in contrast to the mass of unenlightened, ordinary people. Even when some women left the organization or were forced to leave by Sasaki loyalists, they were hesitant to speak out publicly for fear of giving Zen or the master a bad name, or of exposing how they accepted and submitted to their own abuse. This power of Zen ideology embodied by the Zen master is hard to understand without considering Dharma transmission, the power of investiture by the Zen institution. All rites of institution are acts of social magic, which legitimate a boundary while obscuring the arbitrary nature of that boundary. Zen Dharma transmission, the basis of Zen lineage construction, creates this divide between a supposedly beyond understanding enlightened Zen master and everyone else. This is especially so with Asian teachers. Unfortunately, as many scandals in Western Zen have shown, Western teachers have also learned to mine Zen's legitimating story. The structure of Zen's legitimating mythology become a mechanism facilitating abuse. It is difficult to point to a single culprit, but rather, it is a network of complicity, including power, meaning-making, identity, ritual, and abused people themselves. That's it.
Thank you very much, Stuart.
Okay.
Any questions to Stuart Lachs about this talk?
Yeah.
Just a brief comment. I was in a Hindu group and I was the guru's personal assistant, and I just spot on.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate someone speaking about Buddhism because it is becoming so integrated in the mainstream culture and legitimized through psychology and whatnot.
Yeah.
I think it's really important these.
Yeah, well, this is the reason we put this panel together, because the cult society, it always doesn't seem to speak about Buddhism very much. It's all Christian or psychology groups or Hindu groups more and that. And we had the feeling that the Buddhism, and particularly Chris and I with Zen and Tenzin and Tibetan Buddhism, goes under the radar. So everyone thinks it's this pure holy thing that somehow avoids all these problems. It's just they're better at sweeping it under the rug for us. Yeah.
When it comes to Hollywood, do you have an idea of why so many people in Hollywood are attracted to Buddhism?
Leonard Cohen was a student of Joshi Sasaki.
Yeah, Leonard.
Okay.
I read his book after he left, and it was so healing, his poetry book after he left the monastery.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Cohen was his most famous student, so to speak. When this whole thing came out, Cohen had left already.
Okay.
And Cohen talked about him as being like, some godly figure from somewhere else. But he never, he had to know all this stuff was going on because he was a real insider. In fact, in one place, he and Cohen and Sasaki were out for dinner with his assistant, and he offered the assistant to Cohen, if you want to have sex with her. And Cohen felt a little uneasy. But, he never said anything that, maybe and there's some other people that before this thing opened up spoke about this Sasaki, because he lived to 105 or 107, and he was this old master and then Asian and all of that, and but all these people that talked about him as a master's master. There was one man that talked that way about him, and when it came out, they never said a word. They never qualified it or anything. I found that what's the big deal to say, okay, maybe I was wrong, maybe Cohn certainly knew what was going on because he was an insider for so many years, so it's, but he didn't do it, and just as these other people did not, yeah.
I had a sexual relationship with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and I kept quiet about it for 38 years because he asked me to. So I just want to add to your comments about why the women were keeping silent. And I can agree with what you listed, but I also want to add that there is a fear of actually being hurt physically, murdered, basically, if not by the guru, by the followers of the guru, or someone who really doesn't want the truth to come out.
Yeah.
So there's a real fear element there, and then a fear also of being sued and all of that sort of
You're
stuff.
100% right.
I just want to add that to your list.
Yeah. I have a friend that's been very involved in publicizing the problems with another Zen master. And there was a long time there where he started sleeping with a gun under his pillow. And I thought, well, yeah, I guess it is. He lived in an isolated place, a rural part of the country, and the guy that he was exposing so much of did have some connections with this Japanese gangster element, even though he was, that's a whole other story. But he was really afraid that this guy was going to send someone up, and so he kept the gun under his pillow. So
I don't think it's unfounded, because
I didn't think it was either.
One young woman who started talking about it, all of a sudden she was with a young leader of the movement, and on a bright sunny day the plane they were in just went down, and they were never able to find an explanation for it. Everyone died.
Yeah.
So that scared me. That was enough.
100%.
Anyway,
We have time for maybe one more question.
Yeah. When it comes to law enforcement, is there much law enforcement investigation at all in what you've been describing?
No, because it's adults. It's not children.
Mm-hmm.
Even though there is, I think with clergy having affairs with their parishioners or something, I think there is some kind of thing. But somehow in the Zen, and I know many, many, many scandals with, it's always sex, drugs, rock and roll, and money. The law has not gotten in. I think in some cases maybe people were paid off because these organizations generally have a lot of money. And then there's this whole teacher. I think people are also afraid of bad karma. So it's a very powerful tool, this idea of karma. That somehow it's like, and you can never really deal. I mean, if someone says, well, it's this guy is following me, you can see the guy's following you, but karma, it's very nebulous, right? And yet it's always out there, and it's always in. It's kind of the water that everyone that's in these things is swimming in, is this karmic. So I think people are very afraid of that, and and they're afraid to ruin the name of the teacher, and then of course, like this lady said, afraid that they'll get physically harmed, like my friend that's done a lot with this, and he's a burly kind of guy. But he thought, well, if these Japanese gangsters come for him, he'd rather have a gun living in a... So it's...
In my talk, there'll be one case where it actually was not adults but children. Anyway, that's enough time. Thank you very much, Stuart. Now we'll move on to our next talk. It's Tenzin Peljor. He'll be discussing some of the elements of Tibetan Buddhism. So this is sort of not in any manner specific to Zen, but it's across all of the schools. There's many of them. So I'll hand it over to Tenzin Peljor. We'll talk about Tibetan Buddhism.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. There are a lot of similarities actually between Zen and Tibetan Buddhism. We found already out, especially the Zen master has what did you say? He has his quality. He has a pure mind.
His mind
and
is
you can have
clear.
questions. We have similar concepts in Tibetan Buddhism, but it's far more complex, you could say. So, and my talk will be about Tibetan Buddhism, contributing factors to abusive spiritual systems. The whole thing, how abusive system starts, is extremely complex. There are inner factors from the person, there are factors coming from the group, from the cultural background, and also from the Asian culture. So, and then there are a lot of misunderstandings about terms and definitions which are used in Buddhism. So you can make a chart. So I pointed out 3 main areas which can contribute to abusive spiritual systems. I called this slide dependent arising. This is a topic in Buddhism. All things come from many causes and conditions. So, and this opens up the mind for understanding complexity. Without understanding complexity, it's difficult to tackle such issues, how this can unfold. So then I open up the topic. I found 3 main areas or main fields. First, there are doctrinal issues. Then there are so-called Western culture background issues and Eastern culture background issues. Of course, Eastern and Western in apostrophe. So, and we cannot cover all of this, but we will zoom a little bit into some of the factors. Or I give an overview of some of the factors, and then we will zoom into it, and I will give 2 examples. So first, let's look on this, these doctrinal issues. There are basically many misunderstandings about terms like faith, devotion, guru. Then it becomes more tricky. Guru devotion, root guru, and then there is a lot of misunderstanding about karma, fate. Misunderstood often as fate, which is not, about emptiness, ego, egolessness, selflessness, breaking the ego, nihilism, and so on. There's a big issue in Tibetan Buddhism with the Vajrayana, and especially called pure view, and the so-called crazy wisdom. And every field of it is already, a big, huge topic which needs differentiation. The good thing with Buddhism actually is that every term is precisely defined. So usually a good teacher should always start by giving the definition. Otherwise there are misunderstandings, and misunderstandings create a fuzzy world, and cults live in the realm of fuzziness, you could say, and then you can manipulate wonderful yourself and other people. So we will look on the issue of fate, the guru, and Vajrayana pure view. Other things we have to leave out. Then from the Western cultural background, issues which can contribute towards abusive spiritual systems is there is a tendency, at least from my point of view in Western culture, of a lack of self-esteem, a low self-esteem. Many people feel something like meaningless, not having any value or something like this. There are broken families. There's a type of a disorientation, what's right, what's wrong, what should I do with my life. There is a simplistic way of thinking. I call it black and white thinking. Like for instance, a simplistic way of thinking, Buddhism is good. Whatever comes under the label of Buddhism is good. Even journalists fall prey to this belief. And this is simplistic. So then there is a thing which I call consumerism or greed, which is important because we are used to wanting something. So now and then some of those abusive gurus, they sell you something. They sell you spirituality. They say, you need love and compassion. This makes you really happy, like me. No? They give themselves as example. So, but if you want to have it, you need faith, and this basically means you must see me as a holy being somewhat, no? Like this. And then because you want to have something, getting, now compassion or concentration, no? Then this greed actually puts you into a tunnel view where your critical awareness is already undermined. No? And we will show later how this comes in with my own group where I was in, how the manipulation here starts, and how you actually at the end self-delude yourself, or what you say, or brainwash yourself, or whatever, you put yourself on the wrong track, you manipulate yourself. Then there's another issue, is narcissism, lack of education in the general public about Buddhism, naivety among journalists, which contributes that even cult groups are covered positive in the media. No journalist would nowadays promote Scientology. They would write an article about Scientology, but bringing in the criticism too. But the most destructive Tibetan Buddhist groups are promoted even by the New York Times, by CNN in America. So, and there is no critical awareness whatsoever. Then we have a wish to belong to something. This is, of course, because of broken families. Then lack of awareness of one's own motivation. This is very important because abusive systems start, for instance, if you want to be loved, if you want to have some value, if you want to have some recognition, or if you received too less love when you were young. Now, if there is a nice smiling guru or people who love bomb you or something like this, then of course this attracts you because you want to have the love. And this is of course a basic need which is perfectly fine to have. But like good imposters or fraudsters, they get on your desire to bring you into the group and to manipulate to what you don't need, having sex with them or giving all your money and all your savings and so on. So they actually exploit your needs. And if you are not aware of this, you cannot really take care of yourself. And then you become prey to those abusive systems. And usually everybody in the West would rather start from being unaware of why you start initially to engage in Buddhism. And a good teacher would help you to find this out and to get more awareness about this. Last thing, just to touch it, spiritual bypassing is a big topic. And then a general positive prejudice about Buddhism, which Chris said already. Then Eastern cultural background issues which play here into abusive spirit systems are, in general, in the Eastern culture, groups are seen as more important than the individual. So that's why the welfare of the individual doesn't matter too much, as long as the group does fine or something like this. So this, of course, can create a culture where harm for the individual is brushed under the carpet. Then among Tibetans, they have a little bit dissimilar mindset, psychological mindset in Westerners. They have a lot of self-esteem. They have no self-hate. They rather would have something like over self-esteem, which going into direction of pride. Now, if you have such a guru who is full of pride and can stand for itself, and you have a lack of self-esteem, this is attractive for you. You want to become like him because he has what you don't have. And then you misinterpret already what is a fault. Pride, feeling higher or better than others or looking down on others, is seen as a big fault. It's a fault in Buddhism. But you are already so much deluded by the misconceptions that you think this pride is something like healthy self-esteem, which is not. And then you see faults as qualities, and then you are also on the wrong track already. Another thing is, in the Eastern culture, those teachers, they have peers and higher authorities, which can correct their misbehavior. For instance, among monks, you have fellow monks, and there are rituals to confess your faults. Or your faults are addressed. Even there are rituals where you ask others to tell what faults they recognized in you, to get aware of your faults and to work on your faults. Now, these Asian teachers come to the West. Where are the peers? And where are the higher authorities and say, this is wrong, you shouldn't do like this? There are none. Usually they only have the naive Westerners who look up to them, like the God, like what you said about Leonard Cohen, he's a living God. But these are all projections. So, and then, if you have slight narcissist tendencies, these naive Westerners really push your ego and make you a super narcissist. And there's nobody who corrects you. It's even worse, especially in the cult where I was, in the New Kadamba tradition, the leader gradually removed anybody on the same level and anybody on a higher level to be the only and last authority, and then you can do whatever you like. Okay, and then there is also another thing, a lack of understanding of Western culture and their issues. So Tibetans have a different culture, they have Asian culture, they have different values, and they might not really understand what our problems are and where we are, and therefore they sometimes give also really plain wrong advice without recognizing, even if they have a good intention. For instance, there is confusion about the difference between empathy and compassion, not recognizing that people have self-hate and so on. And so then, of course, they apply so-called skillful means, maybe really with a good intention to help you, but actually they harm you. Okay, so this is these are the three main fields. Now let's focus on faith and devotion and the guru, and later we will have a combination of the Vajrayana pure form and feeling meaningless and almighty, all-knowledgeable guru. So you can take the next slide. To make it brief, you don't have to read what's here on the slide. Let's start. I'm asking you, what do you think faith is? Just think for yourself. What is the meaning of faith?
Trust.
Okay, so, and I tell you, okay, if you really want to have spiritual progress, the Buddha says the root of the path is faith. Without faith, you won't have any realization of spiritual progress. It's crucial. And you will find quotes where the Buddha really said it. So then you are taught faith is crucial. Now the question is, what is your understanding of faith? And basically, if I tell you, you must have faith in me and what I say in the doctrine, it gets tricky. So now the real definition, to make it brief, it's extreme complex definition. The real definition of faith is basically to see really existing qualities which there are. And your faith you open up your mind towards those existing qualities, and you are able to recognize them, and recognizing them inspires you in a way. Your mind is uplifted, and you have from this arises the inclination, oh, this is really good. I want to cultivate this quality because it's good for me and others. So, and that's why faith is so important, because it opens you up for qualities, and it inspires you to work on yourself. You have those qualities already, but to increase them. So that's why it's a really important force, but with misunderstandings about faith, we are already on the risk to follow a wrong track. Now another issue in that context is, I wrote it down here, we should also discuss, because we have cross-cultural issues here, what do we think are qualities? Having loyalty towards the teacher, is this a quality? So what actually are qualities? Or is it like the Germans, I'm from Germany, being diligent, you can be diligent to build an atom bomb. Is this a quality? So actually we would say in Buddhism, a quality is something which in the long run is beneficial for you and others, and does not harm you and others. So, and then that's why at the beginning of a spiritual path, it's already good to investigate what are qualities for me, and what from the many qualities which are taught in Buddhism I want to develop in myself. And then you must also understand, if they talk about love and compassion, what they mean with love and compassion. Ask for the definition and check if this is reasonable for you. Okay. So once you have clarity about these points, then actually you can really start, you can make the next slide, a spiritual path. Because the spiritual path in Buddhism is cultivate qualities not yet generated, increase those already generated, reduce and overcome faults already generated, and don't generate faults not yet generated. So actually the spirituality in Buddhism basically means you understand, oh, this is a quality that is good for me and others, and you use tools to work on those qualities, increase them to make them stronger. You get aware of your faults, you understand, this is not good for me, it's not good for others, I should work on it. You get the means, you work on it, and finally you should have a type of a transformation where your qualities increase and your faults decrease. And then of course you will be a more happy person and less fixed and tight and all those things. Now you can make the next. We skip devotion at this moment. Go back. Okay. Another term in that context is devotion. So if you think about what does devotion mean to you, most might misunderstand devotion as subjugation, no? You throw yourself under the authority of a person. But actually it means you have someone or something, it could be also a spiritual practice where you have devotion to, where you understood this thing has real qualities, and you open up towards those qualities being inspired to cultivate them in yourself. Then if you have a so-called guru who is a bearer of qualities, the devotion means you open up towards those qualities to cultivate them in yourself. Now this is the inspiration, but it's not becoming a slave or someone who follows everything the guru says. Although there are similar teachings about this too, but they shouldn't be taken literally. So now what is a guru? You can take the next chart. Just look at the last sentence here. Basically, guru means heavy in qualities. But gurus can also be heavy in faults.
Or just heavy.
Or heavy, yes. The heavier the guru, the better it is. So, now, if you start, you should be able to check if a guru really has qualities, and then what means do you have to understand if the qualities are real qualities or basically false. So, and that's why you can go to the last chart, or one more. Yeah, here. And that's why it is said usually there are 3 qualities a student should cultivate before you practice Buddhism. Being intelligent, which means you are able to discriminate wrong explanations from correct explanation, which means you must have understanding. And you should be also non-partisan, which means not taking side, being attached to a religious system, like thinking Buddhism is better than other religions or atheist or whatsoever. Then you are already attached and you have a subtle or coarse hostility towards other religion, and this dilutes your judgment. And then one of the great scholars of Tibet, they say, if you miss those qualities, especially those 2, actually there are 3, what happens is you will see qualities as faults and faults as quality. So you dilute yourself. And this is usually also not taught. So you can go back. Now, I give an example about how this helped me to become a member of a good cult, being totally brainwashed, and also how I brainwashed myself. So, let's look on here, one slide before, please. Here we have this founder of the New Kadamba tradition, Geshe Kelsang Gyatso. He gives a definition of faith, which says, the definition of faith is a mental factor that functions principally to eliminate non-faith. Then here he says that the definition of non-faith is a diluted mental factor that is the opposite of faith. It's a wonderful self-circling definition, and this is totally self-made. This is nothing like this in the scripture. Now, next slide. Now here in another text he explains, and now it gets really, really bad. Faith is a natural virtuous mind, this is correct, that functions mainly to oppose the perception of faults in its observed object. So, which means if you see faults in me, you don't have faith. I'm sorry, you can never attain any realization if you see faults in me. So if you really want to have progress on the spiritual path, if you really want those qualities, which I spoke about, no? Then you should have faith in me and stop seeing faults in me. This is actually your deluded mind. So, and then you are already in a trap based on your creed, no? And based on doctrinal issues. So, and then those factors come together, and then because you really want something, you start to delude yourself. And the rest comes from the group. And from wrong, faulty definitions and whatsoever. Now it goes even more tricky. Now I come to the next point. Here he says, if we develop the conviction that our spiritual guide is a Buddha, this is the example of the first type of faith, believing faith. So this is, now you can go to the first chart again. Now we come to the realm of Vajrayana and the pure view. There is a training in Buddhism, especially in Tibetan Buddhism, in the field of Vajrayana, where you train to see yourself as a Buddha. And because you might completely go crazy by seeing yourself as the Buddha and everybody else as deluded beings, they also recommend to see at least your guru also as a Buddha. So you train yourself seeing a Buddha and a guru, and then also the environment. So also the environment are also Buddhas, not deluded beings. But it's a training to open yourself up to see more qualities in others than faults, because our cultural condition is we are used to see faults but not qualities. And how can you develop? So it's a training, but it's a secret teaching. And it's not meant for beginners. But in the West, most Tibetan Lamas, and for many years this has been taught to beginners, and has really put many of them on the wrong track. Because they didn't, from the start, develop this intelligence and critical awareness to check a guru properly, and then they relied on wrong gurus or manipulated themselves, and then it became part of an abusive system. Wie viele Minuten haben wir?
32 Minuten, du hast 7 Minuten.
Ich habe 32 Minuten?
Ja.
Um Gottes Willen. Ja. Okay, maybe I stop here at that moment. One tiny thing. Abusive system, there is a tendency among Western...
20 Minuten, nicht 2, 3.
21 Minuten.
23 Minuten.
Then I have still a few minutes. There is a tendency among Western women, you know, usually I talk with many women about this, they taught it or explained it to me. Usually you are only valued if you sacrifice yourself towards others. So, and there is a type of a self-exploitation, not taking care of yourself. So, and then you didn't take care of yourself, maybe you didn't receive much love. Then what you really need is to learn to take care of yourself, and you need also someone who loves you. And this makes you prone to abusive teachers, which first of all, they will get you on this being loved, and then secondly, they might really make you crazy by teaching you about you are too selfish, you need compassion towards others. But what you really need is taking care of yourself. So, and then, because you get more and more confused, you subscribe also to such abusive systems. Okay, maybe I stop at that point. Okay, thank you. That was it from my side.
5 minutes of questions. Anyone want to ask some questions about Tibetan Buddhism or about anything to Tenzin culture?
I have a question. I can relate to a lot of this. I was a monk in my Hindu sect. I thought a lot about many of these things. There's a component of what you're saying that feels to me like these happen when you do it wrong.
Yeah.
And I find that problematic because most established traditions go back to some static texts that have been subject to different groups, interpretations, and vying for popularity since they first came about, pretty much. And so the idea that there is a true version of Islam, of Christianity, of Buddhism, of Hinduism, and that one is not dangerous, and people just need to understand terms properly. I feel like there's a component of that, and I just wonder if you could speak on that, because...
Yeah, thank you. Can you take the last slide? The very last. No, one before, yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, actually, I might be a victim of this idea. There is something like a basic good understanding in Buddhism which doesn't put you on a wrong track, you could say something like this. And so that's why my belief is if you understand what is really meant with the teachings, it might really help you to cultivate qualities and to get rid of forms. So there are possibilities towards a healthy grow in spirituality within Buddhism. And I do not say there is a pure version of Buddhism or this is really the Buddhism. My inclination is rather, use your common sense and your brain, and you need also a lot of work and diligence somewhat to put yourself on the right track, but this is your business. But I wouldn't say out there is something like that's it, or there is a real Buddhism or something like this. Rather, there is an opportunity for spiritual growth if you don't suffer too much from misunderstandings. So, and the key point what I wanted to highlight is we have certain factors dilute you or you dilute yourself and they undermine your critical awareness. Now, I want to finish this with a last quote from the Lama. He says, it is not healthy, of course, for disciples to deny serious ethical flaws in their guru, if they are in fact true, or his or her involvement in Buddhist power politics, if this is the case. To do so would be a total loss of discriminating awareness. So basically what I would like to inspire is to work off one's discriminating faculties and to empower yourself to check what's good for me, no matter if it comes under the label Buddhism or whatsoever. So this is my understanding, but I understand your question. I might have a certain tendency to believe there is something like the genuine
And I might
Buddhism.
be interested to speak with you later, just as a monk and having been a former monk.
Is there question answers with
later.
this?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just was curious your thoughts.
Yeah, in light of this question, in terms of Buddhist history, like in Christianity, you have the sacred text, Buddha says they're sacred texts, but in Christianity you have orthodox creeds, there's like creeds of orthodoxy, which various branches of Christianity agreed upon. Do you have a similar thing with Buddhism?
You mean like basic accepted core text, something like
Yeah,
that?
but like there's these core doctrines that they hold to. The Apostles' Creed would be an example, or the Athanasian Creed would be an example. These are things that they agree upon.
Yes, we have the Buddhist canon, the so-called Peljor and Peljor, and these are all accepted Buddhist texts, but they are not beyond interpretation. No, they are all, and there's a lot of literature also which interprets those
And
things.
then people downplay even that. I mean, so.
So, for instance, you would find in scriptures about you should see the Guru as a Buddha. This is true. You find it there. But there are also explanations why you do it, and then there are more, you could say, more dumb versions and more intelligent versions too. And it's a matter of, actually, if you have only one teacher, this is more risky, because he might rather give you this information which supports the cultish structure.
But I think my point is there's no unmediated version. You're always getting your conception of a tradition through influences of other people. So there's always that.
Yeah. And basically my idea is you have to put it yourself together. And the difference is in the West, you have a guru who tells, I know it, follow me, then you get everything. But I think this is totally crazy. It's your path. You are an individual, and you must check what's good for you. You have the responsibility. And the Buddha, he showed the example by checking the teachers and leaving teachers. He just took what was good and went on. Sorry, now. Our time is over, no?
Yeah, you're pretty much there. All right. Thank you very much. So we've heard about some reasons what promotes abuse in Zen, and some reasons why promote abuse in Tibetan Buddhism. I'm going to talk about so the next step, what happens when these abuses come out, and what do these Zen groups do about it? I'm also from the Zen tradition, and I've looked at 4 different cases, and we'll compare and see how these Zen groups have dealt with when the problem has been exposed. Thanks to people like Stuart, for example, who've been banging from the outside for sometimes decades. So, case 1, at the Zen Studies Society. This is founded in New York City, promotes Japanese Buddhism. In the 60s, Japanese monk Edo Shimano, a guy came over from Japan. The monk sent him over, started this group, and as a non-profit organization with Edo Shimano as the chairman and his wife as the treasurer. So I'm going to give a quick briefing of the groups, and we'll talk about how they responded, how the scandal came out, and then how they responded to it. Became one of the largest Zen centers in the United States, with a major monastery in upstate New York. No famous singers went there, I don't think, as far as I know. But anyway, Sasaki is the big one on the West Coast, and the Zen Studies is the big one on the East Coast. So basically the two number 1 and number 2 Rinzai Zen centers in the States. And then, Shimano's rumored to have had abusive relations with the students throughout his 50-year career until his retirement in 2010. I mean, when he came over from Hawaii in 1962 or whatever, he already started preying on, he was assigned to a hospital ward as a spiritual counselor, and his first victims were actually women in his psych wards. Horrible. So it started already back then, and he kept going for basically 50 years, like I say, until he retired in 2010. So, how was this possible? What did they do about it, and what happened? There's 2 main factors. One is because, example, the scandals kept coming out year after year. In the 60s it started, like I say, in this hospital, and in the 70s there was a big scandal, everyone laughed, and then they kept going. In the 80s another scandal. Why did it keep going? The first reason, for example, is a famous fellow named Robert Aitken. He knew about it already. He's the one who brought Shimano over from Japan in the first place, and he knew about what happened in the hospital. And he started documenting all these problems with Shimano from the outset. He had this whole archive, but he didn't even release it until, when was it, 2000 something? And only waited till 1995 to issue a letter to all the other Zen groups saying, okay, this can't go on anymore. So why did we wait 30 years? Well, the first reason is, like many of us in the West, when the first people come over from the East, we think we're convinced why this is a great tradition, and here we got, this one loser, he's doing it wrong. We don't want to, throw the baby out with the bathwater. So Aitken didn't want to talk about it, or didn't want to go public with it for fear of everyone right away throw Zen out and it would never be established. So you can say what you want by whether the decision was correct at the time. Obviously, you should have publicized it, but at the time, Shimano was one of the first people to come over and he wanted to kind of keep it out of, not disclose it at first, so it finally did in 95. The second reason is, now, as I mentioned before, they had actually a non-profit organization. There was a board, there was these lay people, and the Shimano was a Zen master, and there was actually an institution there who ostensibly should have, done something about it, because the people kept going to the board and saying, hey, look, what's happening? This guy's abusing us. He's actually stealing funds in some cases. Let's have him removed. Let's start over. Now the main problem is that, like in many groups, most of the people on the board were handpicked by Shimano himself. So you got responses. I got some quotes from board responses to people with sincere complaints about Shimano. Well, he hasn't raped anybody yet, has he? And these are intelligent New York City, the elite, if you will, but practicing Zen Buddhist thinking. He hasn't raped anybody yet, has he? We affirm our confidence in Edo Roshi and his leadership to our Sangha. If you have concern for the Dharma and Sangha as the group harmony, we advise you to desist. So, the group harmony, you're just a disruptive person, wipe you off. As you guys obviously know, and from any other cult, this is what happens when it comes to group dynamics. Another great example, I think it was some outside Japanese doctor says, well, look, we've got all these sort of rumors going on. Let's just have some outside, let's set up a committee where some neutral people will look at the rumors and let's see if they're true, because Shimano, of course, has denied it the whole time. I'm the Zen master, I don't do anything like that. So some guy reasonably suggests, let's just find a committee of 3 neutral people to look at the things and let's investigate. This was in 1982. The board apparently said they rejected this idea because it would be impossible to find 3 neutral people in the group. So let's not do this. So you can imagine what kind of delusion goes on when you have board members, and this is a non-profit organization, so you have Westerners, but their interests are in the wrong place. Because they were handpicked by Shimano, and because Shimano exercised the control, it's just a dysfunctioning system. In 95, I think it was, the board actually adopted ethical rules, like literally some kind of, the teacher's not supposed to have sex with the students and all that. And Shimano said, well, of course I'm following these rules. And so even rules, to a certain extent, are ineffective if the leader is not going to be telling the truth the whole time. So what finally happened? Thank goodness the internet came up, and all these past transgressions were carefully archived by a fellow who left the group, and these things started to get public, and it was kind of a snowball effect. Like I say, papers from outside, and finally they had him. He still to this day he claims he only retired. He didn't actually step. Anyway, it wasn't a very clean break. Anyway, he's gone now, and the problem is over in that sense. But he appointed his successor, the one who's in charge of the monastery. Still exists now. You can go there to practice, and it's still one of the biggest centers in New York. You can still go. It's run by his successor, handpicked woman, with whom he also had an affair. So anyway, it's resolved, but it's not resolved. So that's example A, the Zen Study Society. Case 2 is Rinzai-ji. Here's Joshu Sasaki, who Stuart talked about. There's the man himself, 105. basically the same thing that happened on the West Coast happened on the East Coast, or vice versa. Famous as Leonard Cohen's Zen teacher. Rumors of Sasaki sexual advances towards his students rampant for decades. They owned several properties in California, New Mexico, and diverse sub-temples. Sasaki died at 105, leaving no spiritual successors. So what happened here? What did they do about it? The key point, I mean, Stuart went into quite some detail. The key thing with Rinzai-ji is that it kind of happened with a few years after what happened in New York. So they've been keeping it, like I said, there was rumors going for decades. They've been keeping it under the carpet successfully, but now they couldn't do that anymore because it was so clear that what happened in Shimano, it had become public, and so there was intense pressure. It was only happened 2 years later, so they finally had to stop denying that it was actually going on. And as Stuart said, this one letter on the internet got the ball rolling. But they were also hesitant. Sasaki says, he still had all the control. You know, if you guys accuse me, I'm just going to stop teaching. And anyway, you can say thank goodness he eventually just died. And so that was kind of, that was in 2012, I believe, or 2014. They still exist. If you look on their website today, they just removed all references to Sasaki, or not to Sasaki, to the problem. They still don't actually admit that there was any sexual scandals going on. They still think he's the great master, blah, blah, blah. Very problematic. But, you know, he's dead, so it's not there. They can move on. Shimano's still alive. He's retired. And in that case, it's his successor. I don't know who's actually running Rinzai-ji now. Anyway, don't go there. So, case 3. Now we're going to move to, so those were 2 cases in the United States of actual Japanese Zen masters, and now we're going to take an interesting point, 2 cases in Germany of non-Japanese Zen masters. The first sort of next generation of the Western teachers who claim Dharma transmission from their own Japanese Zen masters. And as you can see, it's not just the Japanese who do it. It's, you know, this ready-to-mind legitimization. It's so easy. It's like a carte blanche. All the tools are there. So, you know, if you want to abuse people, it's a great thing to do. Anyway, so we'll see how some Germans have, or 2, in this case, 2 Germans. I live in Germany, so this is the examples. I'm sure there's in other countries that's similar. So we've got Mumonkai. This is a Zen temple formed by Dr. Klaus Elniko. I did a presentation here at ICSA 2012 comparing him and Shimano. We called him Dr. Zen, so I'm going to keep calling him that now. He's a gynecologist. You see, in addition to being a teacher, Dr. Zen was some students' therapist, their gynecologist were women, their landlord. You know, he owned several buildings, so they lived with him, and their employer as well. He ran a little restaurant or I think he probably still does. Anyway, so you can see that the overarching control of his students' lives. But then, of course, as you might expect, anonymous allegations of misconduct by Dr. Zen surfaced online in 2010, accused of secretly having adulterous sexual relationships up to 12 different students. I mean, it was a small group compared to Shimano and Sasaki. They had temples all over the place and hundreds of students over the years. This is quite a small group. Up to 12 different students living a lavish lifestyle at students' expense, being aggressive, egocentric, manipulative, hypocritical, the run-of-the-mill, as you guys seen from any other presentation here, this conference. So, what happened in this group? I would say Mumonkai is your classic cult in the meantime. It's a small group, they're very tightly knit. The first people started leaving. Also, it's a very personal relationships. The husband left and the wife stayed in. He published this one guy published an anonymous thing on the internet saying his experiences. Then I read this, and at the same time Shimano was coming out, I presented this thing at the ICSA. So how did they respond? Well, I, for example, got a really vicious letter from them threatening lawsuits and saying it's all false. The German radio did an interview, or did an anonymous piece on them, and they were also threatened with lawsuits. Because Dr. Zen is a like I said, a gynecologist, but he kind of claimed to be some sort of therapist, and all the students also went in therapy sessions, mandatory, with him once a week or whatever. And so, of course, as soon as his accuser, Dr. Zen said, well, I mean, I've been, he's been in therapy for 20 years, and I can tell you this guy is, he's got mental problems. He's got, so the therapist himself is making his diagnosis, and of course, he's not even a therapist, but that's his argument, of course. Great. So it's basically, the usual cult response: total denial, total, going into attack mode. One great thing. So the students who had left, they created this little Facebook group to sort of, to support each other and whatever. And it turned out later that one of the members of this Facebook group, who they recognized by her username and her photo, a woman who had also left the group, turns out later when the real woman wanted to join the group, said, aren't you already in this group? And she's like, no, I'm just joining now. Turns out they'd actually created a fake profile in Facebook, stole this woman's picture from somewhere with a username, just so they can access it inside this Facebook group and see what all the ex-members were saying about us. It's just classic, it's like criminal energy. So, yeah. What can you say about that, right? And so, they circle the wagons, and everyone else is the devil on the outside. It just got worse. And the funny thing is, so they actually threatened to sue me, and they actually did sue the guy who initially got the ball rolling with this anonymous thing on the net. But to his credit, he didn't stand down. He said, okay, let's pull this through, and let's have the court decide what actually went on. You claim nothing happened, I claim things happened, let's have the court decide, And the great thing was, literally, I think it was a week before the hearing, Mumun Kai withdrew the suit, saying, we're Buddhists, we don't want to escalate, the blah, blah, blah. And I got the letter from the lawyer who informed the defendant about it. He says, look at this is ridiculous. Anyway, so it's obvious that, you can't say it happened, but it's obvious that it was just a scare tactic, filing the lawsuit against the guy, hoping that he would withdraw, and hoping, anyway, when it was clear that the things would come out in court, that Dr. Zen would have to testify, of course, nope, we're going to withdraw. So, like I say, I call this the classic cult. They still exist. He's still there. There's nothing really you can do because he didn't break the law, as we were talking about before. And apparently, in Germany, as a gynecologist, you can have sex with your patients. You can't even go to the chamber of doctors or whatever. Anyway, so that's an example of a classic cult response, I would say. So, case 4, the last one. Buddha San Shoboji, this is a Zen temple near Augsburg, Germany, formerly used by former police officer Hans-Rudolf Döring. There he is. This temple is advertised as the only official sub-temple of Myoshichi school. So here you can see how he really mines the legitimacy. They claim to be the only official Japanese Zen temple outside of Japan, and I guess they are. The paperwork is there because he's a student of this one guy, the Zen master, who was in Migensho. So I guess they've started to really expand the institution outside of Germany by setting up this temple, and they still advertise with it. So this is this is as authentic as it gets, if you will. You got all of Japan behind you, basically, in this temple. He was a board member of not only of his own temple, but the German Association of Buddhists. They actually have an officially recognized sort of umbrella organization. He was the chairman of that for 23 years, and even became the vice president of the World Federation of Buddhists since 2008. So this guy is like top dog even around the world, or was anyway. Then when he retired, he had a stroke a year ago. Also, he's the honorary board member. Anyway, all this to say, his papers are completely in order. This guy was unimpeachable. So what happened to him? 2016, he was arrested. And he's now currently on trial in Augsburg on 22 counts of sexually abusing children, possessing over 2,000 images and videos of child pornography. His hearing was at the beginning of, or mid-June. I was there in Augsburg. I could have taken this picture. I mean, it's a horrible story. It all came out that basically he's a pedophile. It took everybody by, worst case scenario, basically, what can you say about that? Obviously, criminal behavior. And yeah, for this Buddhist temple, it's obviously what are they going to do? Their holy man has just been, he's basically going to be in prison for the rest of his life. So what do you do about that? It looked good in the beginning, because I could say it wasn't really a cult in that sense, because it was basically his private life. You know, he wasn't part of the Zen. He wasn't saying having sex with young boys is part of Zen. So he was, you know, in that sense, the group could have remained healthy. And so they had a board, and they had, you know, regular members, and they were all good people, and they still are. And the initial, when the first rumors came out that this was or when he got arrested, they didn't want to comment until he was convicted. Of course, it was still, you know, lots of people getting arrested. Maybe they can, you know, drop the charges later. Anyway, but the first initial, the board member or the president made a statement to the press saying, "Unfortunately, I have to admit, you know, I've seen what the police have on him, and it seems to be true. And however unfortunate it seems to be reasonable," which is already a good sign. It's not, you know, cult response to be denial. No, of course not, like all the other have done. In no way. We affirm our confidence. So there's none of that. So there was a positive start to it. A key difference here is that I think, I mean, so here we got, this is the temple, this is Döring, this is the Hosen Yurenship, the Zen master. If it had been the Zen master himself, I'm sure the response could have been different. Oh, well, you know, he's a Zen master, he's enlightened. I don't think he could have done this, you know. But because it's only the second in command, if you will, they were probably, and he was only the German guy. Maybe he wasn't doing it right, you know. So there's possibly a bit of that. But anyway, to their credit, you know, they said it was possibly true. However, then it's now. I mean, this is all happening, you know, in real time. He's I think yesterday was probably the sentencing hearing, so I don't know what happened yet. Now the board is trying to deal with. So what do we do now? Our guy is gone. You know, we've got all this bad press. Do we keep going, or, you know, what do we respond? Apparently now there was some leaked internal emails. They want to basically sweep it under the carpet, just like all the rest of them. Right? If you go to their website right now, all of a sudden, I mean, this guy who's been 20 years, he's the guy who started the place. He was, you know, like I said, the vice president of the world. He was the single most famous face of German Buddhism. Now, if you go on their website, you don't even put his name anymore. It's like he never existed. So the first thing to do is they removed all his he references him from their website, and they plan on keeping going with his wife as a tea ceremony master. The Japan wants to keep this place going because it's a prestige thing for, you know, it's their only official temple outside of Germany. So we want to keep. Some of the board members went to Japan right after this thing happened. So what are we going to do about this? We're going to keep sending money. We'll keep you guys in order. You know, we're going to keep this thing going by hook or by crook. And they don't even want to issue a statement about it. They're just going to basically pretend it didn't happen, from what I can tell. And this is kind of revealing. I want to maybe go into more detail of what they're actually, their reasoning for not even making a statement about this. Right? Their teacher for 20 years has been a convicted pedophile. So we want to, you know, we want to handle our anger. Of course, they're all confused and angry, understandably, you know, sad and all that. But it's difficult to deal with this, and especially, you know, in the community it's hard. But we want to go this way together. We want to deal with these problems together amongst ourselves. We want to, you know, right. Circling the wagons, right? We want to keep this amongst ourselves. We want to deal with our own fear and anger, you know, together. We'll help each other, you know, and all that. But we want to bring these feelings we have. We want to use them positively and go in the right direction, which is it's a reasonable thing. But we don't want to bring this on the outside. We don't need to go through this process publicly. You know, we should do it. Keep it quiet, and we have nothing. We have nothing to hide. Everything is out on the table. They claim. You know, it's all there. It's in the press, so we don't have to, deal with. We're not. They claim they're not sweeping anything on the carpet, and then they say, this is the great thing. In Dinkelschabben, there's a little village where this temple is, and where everybody knows them, and they're these freaky Zen people. But apparently, they've had a good relationship with the neighborhood and all that. We get support and compassion from our neighbors. They're helping us, and none of our neighbors would ever get the idea of asking us for issuing a statement. And so how come all these other people want us to issue a statement all of a sudden? So that's their viewpoint, and I'm like, well, you're not even, you're like, they're pretending they're the victims. I mean, they're not talking about these kids who've been abused by this priest, and what are they supposed to think when even, so I find that very problematic, and that's where we're at now. The question is whether the larger Buddhist community is going to exercise pressure to get these guys to open up and say, at least make some, that's the banal statement, we're sorry for what happened, we don't agree with what he did. They don't even say that, for all I know, maybe they support him. Anyway, so that's what happened, or that's what's happening at Shoboji right now. What can we say overall when we look at all the cases? There's great room for improvement in all 4 cases. Especially from groups ostensibly practicing a religion based on compassion, wisdom, enlightenment, all this stuff. Well, you don't see any of that, unfortunately. One main difference is whether the teacher tries to paint this abuse as part of the Zen teaching. If he doesn't, there's at least hope for the group, but in this case, like I said, unfortunately, the hope is unfounded. And the way a group reacts to allegations may be a better indicator of its inherent dysfunction than the allegations themselves. It's still not really, only in the last case has it been proven in a court of law that all this really happened. All the rest, in a sense, Shimano still denies it today, Sasaki's dead, Dr. Zen still denies it. No one's actually proven whether it really happened. But you can see by the way they react, well, even if they're not true, the group is obviously, there's a problem there, because they're not, the way they react is that they're totally, going on the offensive, sending lawsuits and all this, and withdrawing at the last minute. So there's obviously a problem in these groups, even if he didn't have sex with students. Shoboji, the last case, could have come out relatively unscathed, but the decisions afterwards show that the Japanese authoritarianism and secrecy in fact predominate as cultic after all. One other aspect is as both Stuart and Tenzin mentioned, the Asian culture, especially in the last case, the Japanese culture, so their plan is to keep it going with money from Japan and have the Japanese ex-wife now, because she's divorced in the meantime, keep it running. And that's the Japanese mentality, is to not bring things outside into the public, keep it in ourselves. And, you can say what you want about that, but we're in the West here. This is not Japan, and the Germans are expecting them to make some kind of statement. So it's been a problem also with Shimano. These guys come from Japan, live here for 50 years, or there in New York, and then they keep using this, in Japan we do it this way. Well, you're not in Japan, you're in the West, and we Westerns have different expectations of how you deal with a scandal. Anyway, so that's the end of that. Thank you for your attention. There's my email address, and there's Stuart's in case you want to know. I think Tenzin, I did it the last minute. Anyway, if you have any questions, we have 4 minutes, not just to me, but to any of...
How about the media? Did the media ever look into this, and how did they report it if they did?
Well, there's a book about Shimano, in the meantime, an e-book written by the New York Times religion editor. It's called The Zen Predator of the Upper East Side by Mark Oppenheimer. You can. So it's in it. So it's out there. There was in the last case, in the Augsburg case, the press are all over this, obviously, because of the kids. And this is a definite, they're following every single step. Rinzai-ji, because it happened after, there was a few reports in the local paper.
With Rinzai-ji, it was, there were many stories in papers in the Southwest, because I think one of his places was in New Mexico, and so Albuquerque, Daily Express had stuff. I think the Los Angeles paper was his main center, was in L.A., and they had a story about it, and so the press did have a number of stories about it. The Shimano thing, the Times eventually did do a story, this guy Oppenheimer. It's better that he did it, but I think it's a light story. Yeah, and I think the reason the guy did it is because he wrote a little article, his name is Oppenheimer, the reporter. And Shimano called him a liar publicly, that he's a liar, he made this up, and all of that. And that, I think, really stuck a pin in him.
Yeah.
And that's when he decided to do the book.
Yeah.
So.
Any other questions? We've got time for a couple more.
Human rights groups, for example, there are religious liberty organizations and human rights type of groups. Our State Department in the United States gets a lot of activity in this arena, and a lot of the new religious groups go to them for support in terms of persecution or discrimination or things like that. Do you know of any of these groups that work with anything of that nature?
No, I think the Zen people tend to consider that they don't need this stuff. We're the top of the top anyway. Most of them, they're all, they've got PhDs and whatever. They don't claim religious persecution. They don't deal. Some people don't even consider Zen as a religion. So I don't think many of them, or at least I wouldn't consider it as a persecution of religious freedom if the press was reporting on the scandal. As far as Tibetans, perhaps there is some of that. I don't know.
I have no clue.
Okay.
Well, I know with the Tibetans, you have the Dalai Lama and the Chinese government, and there's been this long back and forth between them. I met the Dalai Lama myself in '84, and there was that going on back then. There's just this thing between the Tibetan Buddhists with the Dalai Lama and the Chinese government. He had to leave Lachs and go to northern India and Dharamsala, where he still lives, I believe. Yeah.
The problem in Tibetan Buddhism is the Dalai Lama. I mean, he is really a bearer of qualities. I mean, this is quite obvious for many people.
Yeah.
But he supports this positive image of Buddhism. I mean, and there's nothing wrong with this. But this also a little bit overpowers that there are some basic problems, and people are they think. I mean, he represents really some of the values, the values of Buddhism. You could say at least Tibetan Buddhism. But then this blinds people to see there are a lot of problems. So, and this the good image of the Dalai Lama rather contributes towards the naive Western thinking with Buddhism everything is good. So it's a bit, quite good for Buddhism, but it's not really good for protecting people somewhat. Although he's really outspoken about wrong developments.
Yeah. I would say whatever problem Zen has, I would think the Tibetan Buddhists really have it in spades, so to speak. But they have a bigger carpet and have been very successful of sweeping it under the corner. And the other thing I think really is that because of the Chinese persecution and the political scene, so you don't want to kick someone when they're getting hit by China and stuff like that. So but there's enormous amounts of stuff that's swept under the carpet. I mean, from child abuse, beatings, attempted murder, maybe even murder, just a whole gamut of strange stuff, but it stays very under the carpet. Yeah. They've been the most successful, I think, at keeping that.
So it's 10:30. Thank you very much.